The views and opinions expressed by the hosts of this podcast are those of the individual and not of any affiliated companies. Occasional adult language is used.
Welcome to the ShamTalk podcast, the #1 Notre Dame athletics podcast in the world. Today, the guys talk about what this weekend's matchup against Pitt means for the Irish. Additionally, the guys finished the show by playing a game of Would You Rather. And now, from the Duncan Student Center, here's your host, Jake Miller.
And we want to welcome you back to the ShamTalk podcast. We are back, and Notre Dame football is back after a big win nobody really saw coming against USC. We won't dwell on that too much, but looking ahead, Notre Dame has 4 games left. The hope is for a bowl game, a big, meaningful New Year's Six bowl game. We'll see if they can do it. Along with me today, Tyler Reidy, JJ Post. I'm Jake Miller. Glad to have you on today's ShamTalk podcast. Guys, Pitt's coming to town. Everybody's excited, but I think people are more excited for the drama around this game maybe than the game itself.
Yeah, this has been traditionally a pretty tight matchup between Notre Dame and Pitt. You look back at the series history, this is now the 73rd game. Notre Dame's got a tight grip on it, but the games, especially recently, you look back to that 4 overtime game toward the end of the 2000s, the 3 overtime game during the undefeated 2012 regular season. Pitt can pose a challenge to Notre Dame no matter what kind of season the Irish are having, and certainly the past few weeks with all the ranked primetime matchups, it's been up and down, so we'll see how Notre Dame looks coming off the bye week, but as we know with Pitt, anything goes.
Yeah, I mean, you said it. This is a Pitt team that always is up for it when they come to South Bend. We've seen it before. We'll probably see it many times later. You know, this is a team that, you know, when they come to South Bend, especially under Pat Narduzzi, they've got a chip on their shoulder, and they're going to play hard. That's a hallmark of Pat Narduzzi teams. They don't let you get a win easy. They're going to play tough. They're going to play hard, and I don't think Notre Dame can exactly, you know, roll over in this game. You know, they might have the superior talent, and for all we know, that talent might show, but they're going to need to enter this one expecting to be in a rock fight because that's what Pitt's going to want to do, and that's what, at least for the first quarter, you can expect them to bring.
I think for Notre Dame, we see a lot of players returning to South Bend, returning to Notre Dame Stadium. How do you guys think this plays in the atmosphere, in what fans are thinking, what fans are hoping? Is this the most meaningful part of Saturday's matchup, is these 3 guys who are coming back?
I mean, I'm interested to see how the fan base handles this game for a couple of reasons. One, just the environment to me is going to be very interesting because, you know, I think there's been a lot of think pieces gone out about handling success under Marcus Freeman from Notre Dame. You know, people talk a lot about handling adversity, which makes sense. You usually need to respond to adversity. And, you know, we've seen this Notre Dame team successfully respond to, you know, setbacks, you know, against, after losing to Ohio State, they pulled out a gritty win on the road against Duke. After losing to Stanford, obviously UNLV wasn't a big task, but they responded. After losing to Marshall, they responded against UNC. We've seen them do that, but when Notre Dame has had major successes under Marcus Freeman, they haven't really responded, I'd say, with fervor. They've often kind of had a setback game after that. So I'm interested to see how amped up this crowd is if they're able to maybe, you know, will Notre Dame into finding that second gear early on. And like you mentioned, also the return of transfers. You know, Sebo Flemister and Shane Simon probably in a different tier of interest in Notre Dame fandom than Phil Jurkovec. But thankfully, the players that will be on the field are 2 players I'd say are pretty well loved by the Notre Dame fan base. Shane Simon, not exactly a statistical beast for this Notre Dame team by any means, but he was a very solid player for Notre Dame, and he obviously left Notre Dame on an injury and has carved out a role for himself at Pitt. Definitely there's not any. I forgot. I mean, I'm trying to phrase my words so terribly, but to say things shortly, Shane Simon is a player Notre Dame fans have no beef with. Sebo Flemister, again, not a star on this Notre Dame team by any means, but certainly a well-liked player, and I suspect that he'll maybe get a round of applause when he carries the ball for the first time, just because I think there's many pleasant. I got pleasant memories with Sebo Flemister. I'm sure most Irish fans would agree with that.
He had a couple 5-touchdown seasons, and to go back to your question, Jake, no, I don't think it'll be the biggest part of this atmosphere. I'll be most excited for having a Halloween weekend game again. I know last year Notre Dame had to go on the road to Syracuse.
It's the costume game.
Exactly, the costume game is back. When I visited my senior year of high school, it was UNC the night before Halloween, so that was pretty fun. I'll be excited to see how that turns out inside the student section. But yeah, JJ, you're exactly right. Sebo Flemister is a quality running back at this point. Had a 105-yard rushing performance last week in the loss for Pitt against Wake Forest. Had a breakout game early on in his Pitt career, and he had a couple 5-touchdown seasons at Notre Dame, so don't disrespect what he did with the Fighting Irish by any means if you're a Notre Dame student. But again, it's a little bit disappointing, at least for the student body and the fan base here. Second season in a row, everybody's hoping and building up for Phil Jurkovec to come back here and be the starting quarterback against Notre Dame after some of the things he said about his experience at Notre Dame after departing for Boston College. And now he's a tight end, so that didn't really go as planned for the fan base, but it'll still be a fun environment. And yeah, I'll be interested to see how guys like Flemister and Simon perform, especially if this, as is typically done between Notre Dame and Pitt, becomes a grittier, low-scoring type of game.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing with Jurkovec is, I was telling this to Jake earlier in the week, I've reached the point where, I don't even have amnesty, for the, just you look at his career arc, and I know it's hard to pitch pity for Notre Dame fans and Phil Jurkovec after all that's gone down. I'm not going to, tell you to lay off the guy by any means. But really, when you look at his career arc, he went to his dream school, ended in a toxic breakup. He got a fresh start. That ended in a crash and burn. He went back to his hometown school. Now the fan base seems to pretty much hate him there. And, he's played, I think, 5 seasons now, and really one of them was productive, and pretty much all the other ones have ended, some of which were his fault, some of which, not really in his control, with just, toxic endings. And it's just been a theme in his career. And really at this point, I just kind of feel bad for what really was a promising start, and where it's ended up is just kind of sad to see. I'm sure, I think he's probably pretty happy that obviously he wants to be on the field, but I'm assuming the reaction from the Notre Dame fan base and the students is going to be pretty toned down. I don't think anyone's going to be trying to scream across the field to find him on the bench. So since he's not at quarterback, I think probably the reaction will not be. I remember when I was a kid when Chase Utley played at Citi Field for the first time after the leg break slide. I remember I'll never forget seeing everyone they're standing up, they're screaming. I don't think we're going to get that sort of reaction for Jurkovec's homecoming. And obviously there's an extensive history there of no love lost, but I really think this is going to be maybe a more muted reunion than we all expected.
Well, bringing back your point, this is a guy who right now is playing for pretty much nothing. Let's be completely honest here. Pitt's had kind of a strange year so far. The surprise win, but also it is a little bit of a down year for the program. But this is a guy he's in his 6th year of playing college football. He's played at 3 different schools, and he's getting these reps at tight end. Now, he's a big player. He's 235. I believe he's 6'6". He was always a larger quarterback. But he's probably not going to be an NFL tight end prospect, but they're throwing him here for 6 games. It's an odd end to a very odd college football story that some, after that great year at Boston College, thought could end in a top 10 first-round NFL draft pick. Let's move on to talking a little bit about the history of the game. In Pat Narduzzi's time at Pitt, which has been good, not great, he's brought some level of stability and success to the program. He has lost to Notre Dame 3 times, 2 of those in South Bend, 1 at Pitt, with the last game coming in 2020, the great Ian Book season leading all the way up to the college football playoff. Pitt has lost all 3 of those games. Another thing to note is that Notre Dame was ranked in the top 5 for all 3 of those games. So for Notre Dame, all 3 of those games had a lot of meaning, and this 4th game in the Narduzzi tenure actually has less meaning for the Irish. But we go back to those first 2 games in 2018 and 2015. They were close games, guys. 2018, 19-14, Notre Dame barely sneaks out. And in 2015, 42-30 Notre Dame. And my apologies, 2 of those games were in Pittsburgh and 1 was in South Bend. Catch myself there. So this is the second game here. But Pitt's brought it for Notre Dame, other than this last matchup, which was a 40-point blowout. Historically, in the era of Narduzzi, he's been able to counter Notre Dame, and he obviously saw a lot of that starting with his time at Michigan State.
Yeah, that 2018 game really sticks out for me. Pat Narduzzi was talking about it this week. He has very specific, vivid memories of what he thought was an offensive pass interference on what we guess was the game-winning touchdown that Miles Boykin scored in that 1914 slugfest to keep the undefeated regular season alive. But that game was kind of my first introduction to, midterm weeks are legit. That was my freshman year of high school, and I'm just starting to learn what midterms are and all whatnot. So obviously now we all know how much midterms can be a struggle both for us and the student athletes. But anyway, Pat Narduzzi, you have to kind of respect it a little bit, just how committed he is to the brand of, hating on Notre Dame football a little bit and on NIL and the transfer portal and all of these things with modern college football. But yeah, he'll have this Pitt team ready to go and come into South Bend and give Notre Dame a little bit of a test. Irish can't be sluggish coming off the bye week. We've talked so much about does Notre Dame get a free pass for all of these difficult games back to back to back? Is it more difficult to start your preparations for next week's game when it's a night game? Notre Dame had to deal with that 4 times in a row. And now you got 2 fresh weeks off. You're coming from a home game to another home game with fall break in there. Notre Dame's got to come out faster. They can't come out sluggish, and Pitt's going to try and lure them into that. But with the Irish getting their wide receiver room back healthy with Jaden Greathouse and Jaden Thomas healed, what Marcus Freeman said is all the way back up from hamstring injuries, I like to see Notre Dame come out and put some points on the board.
Yeah, I mean, we said it's going to be a tough game, in the intro, because that's not without precedent. Like you said, the last 3 times they've played, with the exception of the 2020 game, that was, a blowout. You look at 2013, which Pitt won. That wasn't Narduzzi era. And then the 2 games in the Narduzzi era, a 42-30 win and a 19-14 win. Those are games where Pittsburgh was very much in that game until the end. I'm not totally sure what Narduzzi was citing in the press conference. I just pulled up the Boykin touchdown and watched it back, and he legitimately does not make contact with a defender at all. So I have to assume there was some other offensive pass interference call in that game that he was referring to. But, like you said, you got to give Narduzzi credit. He has fully entrenched himself in the mentality that this is his game. He wants to win every time it pops up on the schedule. He hasn't had it yet, but he's going to be gunning for it. And I wouldn't say this is an especially vulnerable Notre Dame team. But, like we just said a little bit earlier, it's not one that you can't put your eyes further down the road, and you can't put them back on USC week. This is a game that, Notre Dame certainly should win. I believe they're favored by just over 19 points. But it's also one that if they don't take it seriously, they're going to be punished for it. And I think Pitt knows that. I think they're going to come in, with the expectation that, hey, if Notre Dame gives us this game, we can take it from them. So I think Narduzzi is going to be emphasizing that all week, and we'll see how Notre Dame comes out. I think they're going to try to, set the tone very early on. Notre Dame's had success this year, at least because what's interesting to me about this game is it's Duke and Louisville. I think are Louisville obviously kind of putting a dent in that argument with the loss to Pitt. I'd say are both very clearly good teams. I don't need to tell you that USC and Ohio State are also good teams. And then you have Central Michigan, Tennessee State, Navy, who are all sort of wash games. NC State's, I'd say, the only average team that Notre Dame has played this year, and Pitt's probably going to be the second game in that category. So I'm interested to see, just how much Notre Dame's able to control the game, because at NC State, we saw Notre Dame, for the first 3 quarters, that was a well-contested game, and then Notre Dame was finally able to pull away at the end. I'm interested to see how Notre Dame goes about trying to kind of take this one under control, because you have to figure this is a game Notre Dame would like to put away very early.
We got a lot more coverage coming for you. Some look around on the college football landscape, a little bit of would you rather and score predictions, all that and more in 60 seconds. First, a message from our friends at Amazon. You're listening to the ShamTalk.
You're listening to the ShamTalk podcast, the #1 Notre Dame athletics podcast in the world. We appreciate your support, and we're constantly looking for ways to improve the listener experience. In order to do that, we need your help. We have a pretty cool relationship with Amazon.com, and we'd like to invite you to join us. Amazon recently sent us a special link. When you use this link to buy something from Amazon, we receive a small percentage of the order. Best of all, it costs nothing extra for you. The link is available on the screen and in the description below. Once again, before you head to Amazon, start with our link. It doesn't cost you anything extra, and it helps us provide you with the best possible listener experience. Thanks for your support. And let's send it back to the guys.
And a big thank you to our friends at Amazon. Just a friendly reminder before you buy anything on Amazon, first use our link. Doesn't cost you anything extra, takes all of 10 seconds, and really appreciate it here at the show. Guys, we typically make our college football playoff predictions, but this past week, pretty light. Obviously, Michigan, nobody knows what will happen there. But in the Big Ten, Penn State pulls out. Likely will not be a candidate. But instead, hey, there's been a lot of other stuff. Let's play some Would You Rather, a classic game. Some motivation to do some stuff like this from our good friends over at the Independent Podcast. Check that out, definitely. Let's start with Tyler. Tyler, today Cincinnati announced a whole bunch of scheduling moves. They're dropping some home and homes. They're adding a game against Nebraska at Lucas Oil Stadium. And being the native Midwesterner here on our panel, would you rather have ND continue, like Cincinnati and Nebraska, to play neutral site games every year? Or would you rather have Notre Dame not play neutral site games and add one true home game each year?
I think it depends on who you're scheduling. I think in the past, you look at these Shamrock Series games, Notre Dame's played Navy, BYU, Syracuse, even going all the way back to a game like Army in 2016. I mean, these aren't top-tier opponents, and I think we have to keep it that way because you can't take a game like Ohio State or Michigan going back to the start of the 2018 season and move that outside of the college campus. It just doesn't feel right. I remember when I think it was Georgia and Clemson opened up a couple of years ago in Charlotte with their number 1 versus number 3, I think it was, matchup. And that just doesn't feel right. You take college game day away from a campus. We all remember how special that Notre Dame-Ohio State environment was here leading up to it, and I'd hate to see that removed, especially when we've only got 4 years here and maybe 1 game, 2 at most like this year at home where you're playing a top-tier opponent and the environment's going to be at its best in college football. Obviously, being at Notre Dame, it's at its best every week, but it's admittedly different when a team like Ohio State or USC comes to town. We've got to keep them coming to town. Of course, if Notre Dame can find a way to get into a place like SoFi Stadium or even US Bank in Minneapolis, where the Irish haven't gone quite yet, against those middle-range opponents, I'd like to see it continue, of course, but you can't do it to me with the top tier. That doesn't move the needle enough. You got to keep it on the college campus.
Another place on that list, some place where a game is being played this weekend. Irish, I'm sure, will visit Chicago again, and maybe they go to Wrigley for that next game. Obviously, Northwestern. Who do they have? Is it Indiana?
It's Iowa.
Northwestern Iowa.
Saturday, November.
Of all the games.
Peacock exclusive there. JJ, a big random news drop happened on the Friday of USC week. Notre Dame announced that at the end of this year, Father John Jenkins, president of the university, is going to be stepping down from his role as president. Father Jenkins is known for being fairly involved in the athletics at Notre Dame, definitely working closely with Jack Swarbrick on things like NIL, college football playoff, hiring coaches for the major sports. JJ, would you rather have an ND president highly involved in sports, or do you rather have them hands-off, leaving it to the athletic director?
That's a really good question. Because that's kind of what I've been debating with myself, really since the Jenkins news was announced. Because, Jenkins' legacy, I'd say, with Notre Dame sports-only fans, because we need to make a distinguishment here. Fans of Notre Dame sports are very much, perhaps more so than any school in the country, not always affiliated with the school itself. And Jenkins' job, nominally, is much more concerned with the school itself. And I don't think people maybe, I don't know if appreciate's the right word, recognizes the one to use, that Jenkins is, for his position, definitely very involved in the Notre Dame sports scene. He does take a hands-on approach. And I think I'm going to say that is necessary at a school like Notre Dame, because I think the most important thing Jenkins can do, and there's more than enough, marks on his time as an athletic liaison to kind of, the Ludwig saga is going to go down in history, and there's plenty more incidents of similar types. But I can't help but, maybe have some concern as to if Notre Dame's president was just, some guy that stayed away from sports and sports did their own thing, if Swarbrick would be able to have the amount of power he was able to leverage, and it is still leveraging in the college football scene to this day without the the stamp of approval and the I think Swarbrick's approval from the board of directors and the various idiosyncrasies of Notre Dame's leadership is in large part due to the fact that Jenkins did give him the endorsement every time. I'm not sure without that endorsement from Jenkins, someone that always made sure that Swarbrick would have his backing when Swarbrick wanted to wade into matters like NIL, that Notre Dame's administration probably, historically speaking, wouldn't want to get involved in on the national scene. Swarbrick was not afraid to get involved in those. I'm not sure that without a president that was as involved, he'd be able to do that. I think in this age of college sports, Notre Dame's going to need to be proactive, especially as an independent. They're going to need to be innovative, they're going to need to be proactive, and they're going to need to be very involved on the national scene. I don't think you can risk not having a strong connection between your administration, which I'd say is uniquely structured, uniquely prioritized, and the athletic department, which at most schools, the bond between the athletic department and the administration, it's very important. It's never going to show up on the stat sheet, never going to show up in a game report, but anyone who works in and around college athletics will tell you your athletic department and your school need to be aligned. And at Notre Dame, if you don't have that alignment, it's especially damning because Notre Dame's administration is so unique. I think I want a president that is going to work with the new AD, and even if that leads to some slip-ups, I think the general benefit of making sure that everyone's on the same page at a school like Notre Dame it's a big benefit.
Important to note that Father John Jenkins has actually played quite a big role in the realignment. I would say the sole reason that Cal and Stanford were able to get into the ACC was because Father Jenkins was big on trying to make sure that the ACC is a strong academic conference and that no highly prestigious academic school is left without a home to play. So that was very much led by Jenkins, followed by Swarbrick, and obviously next year Stanford and University of Cal Berkeley joining the ACC. Tyler, we got 4 more games to play this year in a bowl game, but obviously Irish fans are looking ahead to bigger things next year. The schedule looks a little bit easier, but there's a lot of question on what Notre Dame should do. Tyler, at the quarterback position, would you rather have Notre Dame recruit a 2024 transfer quarterback from another school, or just save the space for whoever takes it, likely CJ Carr?
This is a tough one. This is a tough one to answer now, that's for sure. I'll be a little bit biased here because I want to see Notre Dame win as much as possible while I'm here. So as of right now, I will say go after a quarterback for 2024. I definitely don't think you can try and start fresh right away with CJ Carr. That's very much off-brand for what Notre Dame typically does at the quarterback position. Steve Angeli and Kenny Minchie are the front runners to potentially take the reins a year or two into their careers, but not a ton of experience behind them. Again, one of them could show out at Notre Dame's bowl game, assuming Sam Hartman would rest himself up heading into a potential NFL draft selection. But I'm going to say go after somebody in the transfer portal. I think there are some good options out there this year. And I still think Notre Dame with a couple solid receivers coming back. You look at the freshmen in Jaden Greathouse, Rico Flores, who have had a couple breakout showings this season, haven't been too consistent, hampered by injuries throughout the season. They come back next year and really take ownership of this playbook, take ownership of this offense. Maybe you get one of these tight ends outside Mitchell Ovens to develop further as well once someone like Eli Raridan potentially gets healthy. This offense could make a splash in 2024. You'll have a deep running back room, minus Audric Estime, obviously, but I think Notre Dame has the tools around it to compete in 2024, but I'd hate to see it hampered by the quarterback position, and I think with the playoff expanding to 12 teams after next season, you can risk a little bit long-term not developing a quarterback right away next season.
We'll have to see. Obviously, I think for the Irish fans, it's going to be a year of optimism, a year where a lot of crazy things can happen, and a year of a lot of fun. Not a lot of premier home games next year, obviously Florida State visits, but you got a road trip down to Purdue. The Shamrock Series that everybody knows is going to happen, but I don't think it's still been announced, over at Yankee Stadium against Army. A game at MetLife Stadium against Navy should be a good one for sure. JJ, let's talk a little bit more about this year bowl game. I'm going to tweak the question that was asked on the Independent podcast, so you probably know where I'm going, but I'm tweaking a little bit. Motivation for our segment. Would you rather have Notre Dame beat LSU in the Citrus Bowl, or would you rather have Notre Dame beat Air Force, the Group of 5 representative, in a New Year's Six bowl game?
It always had to be Air Force, didn't it?
It has to
be
Air Force.
And for that reason, I am taking beating LSU. Listen, I understand the correct answer is you want to beat Air Force in the New Year's Six goal. I understand that is the right answer. That being said, I know for my personal purposes, which is trying to defend Notre Dame's honor in group chats across the Twitterverse, it wouldn't get any new respect. No one's going to, give Notre Dame credit for being Air Force in the whatever Citrus Bowl you gave. No one's going to give us credit for that. And for my personal purposes, even though the streak would technically have been broken, I would get the same amount of crap for that as I would if we didn't play that game at all. And the win against LSU, I'm not even, I would say I'm, as far as Notre Dame fans go, pretty far to the neutral scale on the Brian Kelly quote-unquote rivalry. I'd say I'm pretty firmly past it, and I'm not going to root for him, but I don't really care what he does down at LSU. I think he did what pretty much most coaches would do in that situation if offered the job he was and the price point it was given. I don't think it was surprising he left, and I obviously don't. I'm not happy it happened how it did, and on some level I don't absolve him of blame, but I certainly would not say I am all on the train of Brian Kelly made this unforgivable transgression. He made $95 million to go coach at one of the best schools in the country. It's Notre Dame, and that always holds some weight, but really when you look at it, it's a hard deal for him to turn down. All that said, so with that preface, I'd say I'm pretty neutral on the whole Brian Kelly situation. But what that win would mean for Notre Dame, one, I think Tim O'Malley made a good point on the Irish Illustrated podcast. You want to get players to play in that bowl game. Everyone's playing in that bowl game.
Yeah.
I think they were saying you have Kyle Hamilton coming out of retirement to play one more game for Notre Dame. If you want to get a game where Sam Hartman suits up, where Audric Estime suits up, get a game where you have a prove-it game for Marcus Freeman. And would it be maybe foolish to judge Marcus Freeman's tenure on one game in a bowl matchup on a neutral ground? Of course. Would that 100% be how that game, ends up? Yes, the game would be a referendum on where both Brian Kelly and Notre Dame stand as of right now, and probably for the foreseeable future, since I don't see another Notre Dame LSU matchup on the calendar anytime soon. That game would mean a lot to how those two programs are perceived, both by their own fan base and by the national media. And even though it wouldn't break the New Year's Six streak, a win over LSU in that game would do so much to legitimize the idea that Freeman had indeed taken a step forward off of where Kelly left, maybe not in record, but the culture he was building at the program, the identity he set with the program. To get a win in that game would be such a boost to that idea, even if, I think any unbiased analysis would tell you a bowl game at a neutral site on a one-off where you probably have a few absences, it shouldn't be used to judge a big picture program. But we all know it would be, and a win there would be huge for Notre Dame in that sense.
A couple things I'll note is that Notre Dame really does not control its own destiny. Notre Dame, even if they do win out, isn't a lock for a bowl game. How that process works is it's not necessarily only the top 12. We have to consider there has to be a spot for that group of 5 team. The companies that run the bowl have a lot of say in which teams they want to go. So Notre Dame should win out, and if they do, they have a great chance making that New Year's Six bowl game. But by no means is it a guarantee. I'd say the other thing to point out is, as we enter into this new 12-team era next year, this is the last year where there is New Year's Six bowl games. Obviously, they'll still get played, but it'll be in a different setting. It could be a home game. Notre Dame hasn't won one of these games in many, many years. I forget the exact date, the exact year. Is it 94?
I want to say 94, but
94?
It was in the 90s.
Yeah.
Maybe 93.
If they don't win this, they'll never have the chance to, because the record, it becomes different, right? So I think this is a historical prove-it event in a sense. I agree. I think Air Force, it's surprising that they haven't lost. They look like a deeply flawed team, even against the opponents they're playing, some of whom, are decent. I think we take a step back. Navy looks like a decent, formidable team. Wyoming is a good team in the Mountain West.
They look like a 3.0 version of Navy, and that can both be used as a compliment or an insult.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
I'd say that's absolutely true, that they look like if Navy kind of upgraded itself twice, you'd have what Air Force is.
We'll have to see 4 more games left, a few more weeks before we get the announcement of the bowl. Let's wrap up this segment. I got a question for both of you here. Guys, would you rather have Phil Jurkovec never see the field on Saturday, or that he catches a touchdown pass?
Ooh.
Can I have the score line to both games?
JJ, I'll let you go first on this one. You've been around him.
Listen, for the narrative, the Phil Jurkovec touchdown would be, for content purposes, unreal. We'd have stuff for shows for the next 2 months, because you already know I'd be living if I was Phil Jurkovec and I scored a touchdown as a tight end against Notre Dame at Notre Dame Stadium. That being said, I think I'll take him not seeing the field. I think that's best for everyone, Notre Dame fans, because I don't want to say we need to move on, but at this point it does feel like we're punching down quite a bit every time we make a Phil Jurkovec reference, because at this point, the dude's the backup tight end for Pitt, and we are probably witnessing the best quarterback Notre Dame has had in the last decade right now. So, taking shots at him does feel like punching down. Having him just not be on the field, I think, would be best for everyone. We move on, he moves on, we go.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat as you. It's time for a little bit of a breather of a game here. We've had enough high tension, close games this last almost month and a half now, and I don't think a Phil Jurkovec touchdown catch would contribute to a nice, relaxing Notre Dame win in any way. Of course, we already talked about it. Pitt's going to be a challenge either direction, but hey, maybe he catches a pass and Xavier Watts forces another fumble and it turns into a touchdown the other way. Who knows? But I'd rather he just not see the field, and like you said, it's something that we're probably due to put behind us and move on from it and just take it easy and pick up a Notre Dame win and move on to this back half of the schedule.
We will indeed have to see. That is our version of Would You Rather. If you have questions, suggestions, give us a tweet. Let us know. You can tweet us at Notre Dame TV, at NDSMC Observer. We'd be happy to hear any of your questions, feedback, content suggestions for our next podcast. Guys, before we part ways tonight, let's get a score prediction. What do you think the Irish are going to do on Saturday?
I've got 31-14 Notre Dame. I think Pitt maybe comes out, keeps it close. It could be a little bit like that Central Michigan game where Notre Dame's outplaying them pretty badly, and the score should be wider than, or the game should be more of a margin than the score would suggest. But I think Notre Dame pulls away late. They run the ball pretty well, flash its depth. Again, the offense probably won't have its best game. I think we're still waiting to see that unit get back into a full-time rhythm. But the defense is going to continue playing good football, create a few turnovers, 31-14 Irish.
I'd say 31-20. I'll say 20. I was going to say 23, but I do think they keep it to a 2-score game. I was just saying earlier when we were off mic, I kind of expect this to be the sort of game. Remember Navy 2 years ago where it was like a 34-20 game that never really felt like a 1-score game, but didn't feel like a blowout either? That's the kind of vibe I'm getting for this one, where Notre Dame is not really playing them close, but they're not dominating them either. I think Notre Dame kind of establishes a 2-score lead relatively early and then kind of holds that lead most of the way. Maybe Pitt works their way back in with I do think they cover the spread. I don't think Notre Dame wins by 19. But I like 31-20 as a nice 2-score cushion for Notre Dame in a game that they never really feel dominant in, but they definitely feel in control of.
Marcus Freeman returns not on the flag football field. He returns to the field, returns to Notre Dame Stadium. Hopefully the Irish get the win here. And that's all for us on the ShamTalk podcast. You can tune in to Shamrock Sports on Friday night for full coverage on NDTV's YouTube page. Check out the Irish Insider at ndsmcobserver.com or get a physical copy anywhere around campus. For JJ Post, Tyler Reidy, and myself, want to see ya. Thank you, and go Irish.
If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe and leave a rating and review. To stay up to date with ShamTalk and get all our behind-the-scenes content, you can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Notre Dame Television. That's all for now. Thanks for listening, and go Irish!